Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. We'll be going over the Revit materials. My name is Rebecca. I'm from the MicroCAD marketing team. So Mariah is going to go through the Revit materials with you guys today. And if you do have any questions about them, feel free to throw them in the little questions section. Should be on your right side where the panel is, or you can throw them in the chat as well. And we should have some handouts in there for you guys towards the end of the webinar. But I'll go ahead and hand it over to Mariah so she can get started.
All right, thank you, Rebecca. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mariah. For those of you that I've worked with, you probably did notice my last name has changed. I'm still the same person, still the same knowledge. For those of you that I have not worked with, it's nice to meet you. A brief background about myself. I have been using Revit professionally for about 9, almost 10 years now, which kind of astonishes me some days. And within those years, I have learned quite a bit, especially about materials, and I want to share that knowledge with everyone. So to start off today, we are going to release some polls. So the first poll that you should be seeing is, what is your experience level with Revit? So you're a novice, you barely use them, you have a little bit of experience, primarily you're using anything out of the box. You have a little bit more, you can start to create your own, or you are fully experienced, but you're still hoping to learn some tips and tricks from us today. So I'm going to go ahead and give that a minute. And we are going to minimize our webcams while we are presenting, just so there is a little bit less distraction. All right, so I'm seeing 90, okay, there's 100%. So we are a good mix of today. So I think you all can see, so a lot of you have no experience, some have minimal, and then there's a combination of experience and creating your own. So good to know that. Another one we are going to ask you is, what industry are you currently in? We just like to get a feel for where our customers are at that we are talking to today. All right, so it looks like everyone is primarily architecture. We do have a few MEP people with us, and 13% is other. I'm always wondering what that other is. All right, and last but certainly not least, what version of Revit are you currently using? We do know we are quickly approaching probably that release of 2020, and I believe it was 2019 had some fairly extensive updates to the materials. All right, so good to see a lot of people are on 2020, if not working in 2021. So those are very similar in nature, especially when it comes to materials. All right, so with that, Rebecca, you can go ahead and close the polls. I'm going to dive into our PowerPoint here. And a few things to begin with. So why are materials so important? They have so much data available to them. So materials obviously are great for rendering purposes. I know that's the information that a lot of people talk about. But they also are great for cost estimating. You can actually tie that information in. And then beyond that, you can have physical and actual thermal properties tied to your materials, and that can in turn feed upstream to programs such as Insight, especially if you and your team are working towards any type of LEED accreditation or a similar program. That can certainly come into play. So a few of the dialog boxes explained before we do dive into Revit today. So first up, how do you get to your materials? So of course, if you are editing your walls, you can certainly get to your materials that way. But beyond that, they live under the Manage tab and then the materials in the far left-hand corner. Which brings us to our material browser. So if you have experience with this, you are probably used to seeing this information. For those of you that do not, the top left-hand panel is your your project materials. And those are the materials that are currently within your project and available to be used from the get-go. The lower left-hand corner is the Autodesk library, or really any library, and that is installed with all your Revit software. This is also a great place if you have supplemental Autodesk material libraries from specific manufacturers. You can load this information and that's going to stick there, and you are able to reference that throughout a variety of projects. The right-hand side is what we call the material editor. And if you will notice up on the top portion of that material editor, there are currently 3 tabs: identity, graphics, and appearance. We will see here in a second, once I do get into Revit, you can also add physical and thermal tabs up there as well. So looking at this library panel a little bit more extensively, because I'm sure not all of you are familiar with what all of these buttons do. But for the most part, it's a lot of show, hide, showing hide the library panel or the library tree, which is on the left-hand side, as well as opening and closing that material editor. In the left-hand side on the bottom, you have open and close your asset browser, which will come into play here in a second, as well as creating new materials or duplicating, as well as opening existing libraries or creating new, and material parameters. So if you're anything like me, I do recommend always kind of having this dialog box populated and open. I feel that you can get a lot more information if you do have that. All right, and this is the asset browser. Now, some of you might be familiar with this and some of you might not. This actually is yet another dialog box that opens on top of the material editor that we have seen. And this dialog box has a variety of assets. And when I say assets, I mean items that are linked to the physical and the thermal properties, as well as appearance. So there's a lot in there, and we will be sure to look at that here in a moment. And one thing that I do want to call attention to is, if you aren't familiar, you can actually tag your materials within Revit. I know a variety of companies actually use this for their annotations when it comes to their wall sections. And I just wanted to call out here on our screen the available parameters that are available out of the box specifically that you can tie to materials. So your comments, even your cost, description, name, all very common ones. So with that, I am going to dive into Revit. Double check. All right. Looks like you all can see that at this point. So this is a default house we kind of designed off of the internet. It is no one's house in particular, but as you can see, there is a variety of materials already applied to this. So let's take this one step further and dive into all those dialog boxes that we saw today. So remember, we're going to go to that Manage tab, and then we're going to go to Materials. All right. So first up, I am going to drag this down just a little bit, and I'm going to go to Default. So a quick way to get to a default material is you can type up in this search bar. And mine's taking a few seconds because everything that is running today. So as you are typing in there, it should populate accordingly anything that is already within your project materials, as well as some information that possibly might be living down here in your libraries as well. So we can see in here, there's quite a few that's related to somehow default. So I am going to select default wall, as I'm sure that's something that most architects deal with in this instance. So one of the things that I do want to note is you might be seeing a orange triangle with an exclamation point on most of your materials. And what that is coming from is actually when Autodesk updated the whole material library, which I believe was in 2019. So what they did is they basically revamped a bunch of assets And that little exclamation point is kind of just telling you, hey, there is an update available if you would choose to use it. Of course, that is dependent upon you and your company and how you want to. So looking at our default wall material. So first up, I am going to look at identity. So of course, its name is going to be super important when you come in here. This can populate later on in schedules, as well as those tagging information that we did see. Another few items that I do want to bring note here. Of course, you can look at the class, and comments and keywords also can be tied as well. Some of my favorite information is the product information, especially when we get into things like paint or wood styles, something along those lines. You can actually tie in manufacturer and model information. So really kind of pointing to very specific entities, as well as that can also help you within your specs. Next up, we can implement our cost, and you will see that a little bit later on here, and then a URL if that is applicable. Last but not least, under identity data is certainly some keynoting information if that's the way that you choose to annotate your drawings. So next up is our graphics. So graphics are extremely powerful in Revit. Hopefully you do have some experience with them. So first and foremost is our shading. So the shading comes into play when you are determining what your view is going to look like. So if you ever go to shaded or consistent colors, that's where this is coming into play. Personally, I love to use the use render appearance. This one just doesn't happen to have it checked. Next up is your surface pattern as well as your cut pattern. And a great aspect that was introduced lately within Revit is having both a foreground and a background. So you can certainly apply both of those and create a multitude since they're both available. Next up is our appearance. Now, this is one of the most important tabs if you are working with creating your own materials. So first and foremost, what I want you to be aware of is kind of this little hand symbol, and currently, hopefully you guys can see that there is an 11 above that. Now, what does that actually indicate? So that indicates that there are basically 11 entities within this project materials that are dependent upon this particular material. So in most instances, we certainly don't want that. We want each material to be individualized and working for itself. So a great way to do that, you can always replace your asset. Or another quick, easy way that we do encourage is actually duplicating this asset to work with it. So if I do duplicate that, it does take a second, but then you will see that little hand is now showing 0, indicating that when I edit this, nothing else is going to change with it. So I am going to expand these. So your information, so name is certainly important, what that description is, keywords. Hopefully I don't have to harp on this too much. You guys are familiar with that. Next up is generic, and generic can be sometimes interchanged with, what's the term I want to call it? It's render appearance, its main entity. I'm thinking of brick. Of course, you're going to want to have a brick pattern associated with that. So that's where this image would come into play. So no texture, there we go, that's a good word for it, is assigned to this material. And if I would click within the image, it will bring up another dialog box. And this dialog box is going to allow you to path to wherever you have your Autodesk materials or other library of materials located for that bitmap for this particular material. So I would come in, I'm not even sure, I think they live in the C drive. I'm not going to path down to it, but we can certainly get you that information if that's something that you are struggling to find. I'm going to cancel that. You can, of course, put a color on top of it. This is going to affect the color of the surface. So, you know, how much light there is passing through, but also bouncing back off. This can start to, you know, certainly affect those. Something that I do want to call attention to, even though I don't have an image selected in here. Let me find one real quick. I'm going to switch over to my siding clapboard. See, this one says parameters that has not the same ones tied to it. Excuse me 1 second. Let me find one that has an image tied to it. This is why I love live demos. Everything always, you know, you think you have everything planned out and then there's always a little wrench. So in this instance, I selected cherry wood, and you will see instead of seeing generic, you see wood because that is what is associated with this. When you do see the name of the bitmap, if you would click on it, wrong instance, bear with me. If you would click on the image, there we go, that's the dialog box I want. You come up with a texture editor. So within here, even more, you can look at that brightness. You can actually invert images. And this is where you can actually start to scale an image as well, down here in the bottom. So perhaps you're working with a wood floor and initially your client is, you know, thinking of a smaller plank. You know, you can automatically come in here and scale that plank up if they decide to go with something larger, but yet they still want that same color family. And then also, of course, we want to repeat it in the vertical and horizontal direction so that you do not have any of those kind of funky lines that you can sometimes get when you're tiling materials. All right, looking at our wood, I'll stay on this one for a minute. There are a few other options. So wood has a stain color. You can have finishes depending upon the applied material. And for this, you can also describe whether it's used for furniture or flooring. All right, so I am going to switch back to my default wall for just a moment. Bear with me. So our default wall does have a few different parameters compared to that wood, although all still helping define its render properties. So we have image fade, glossiness, our highlights as well. From there, we can talk about the reflectivity of something. So obviously, if you might be dealing with glass, there might be a little bit of reflectivity if you're talking about mirrors, or you can be looking at something and it goes completely through. The same when it comes to transparency. Is there anything that needs to be cut out? Excuse me, and then cut out specifically. So I'm thinking chain link type of fences is a great way to deal with that. And a lot of that information actually comes from the bump map that is associated with it. Self-illumination, if there's any properties associated to that, as well as that specific bump. And this can be related if we're speaking with brick. You certainly probably want a little bump map behind it to kind of bump it up a little bit more, give it a little bit better texture. And then last but not least, if you want to tint the material a little bit, you can certainly do that as well. All right. So are we having any questions so far? If you do, please feel free to type them either in the questions, or if the chat box works for you, you can certainly type them in there as well. So in still speaking with my default wall, as you'll see up here, we do have a little plus symbol associated. So if I would do that plus symbol, there is that physical and that thermal appearance, excuse me, assets as well. So if I would add physical in here, you see that it does automatically bring up the asset browser. So I'm just going to look at physical assets, and perhaps I'm just going to pick kind of steel to aluminum in this instance. And once you would decide if this is what you are wanting, you can use this little arrow that we are seeing here to add this asset to this material. So for example, I'm going to add this in here. I'm going to close that back out. And now we see under physical, there is some information tied to this. So to be honest, I am not as well versed in the physical and thermal properties, but we can certainly see in here, there is mechanical information tied to it as well as strength information. So if you are in that other category that we are seeing, this might be more applicable to you. The same can be done with the thermal properties as well. All right, so in dealing with that, I'm now going to move on to the lower portion of our material browser, and that is our libraries. So I'm going to collapse this for the moment. So under here is our home. You can have your favorites, and then your AEC materials are what are automatically downloaded with your Revit. I should say Autodesk, but Revit in general. And you can see there, that is where that Autodesk material library is living. So next up, I want to call attention to what you're seeing here on your screen is Sherwin-Williams, specifically their ProMar 200 eggshell line. So one of the great things that we are seeing from manufacturers these days is that they are actually giving us their libraries to actually use, because they have realized that if they give us libraries, people are going to spec that information. And then last but not least, this is a library that I made, which we'll talk about here in a second as to why I made that. But referencing back to this Sherwin-Williams here, I did download another one, and as reference, once you have a library kind of path into this home location, it is going to start populating elsewhere. So if I would bring up another file, which I have open, so if I can switch that real quick, if I go to my Manage and Materials, you will see that when I expand the home, after the scroll wheel is happy, that eggshell is already there, as well as that personal library that I have started to create. So once you put those in there, they are always referenced. They're great to go back to. So I'm going to cancel out this one real quick. All right, so once we are in here, a great thing about these materials is that they are easily loaded into your project, but they're not taking up any really space yet within your project. It's not any really computing power. So a great way, let me expand this so you can see a little bit more. If you would come in here and you decide that you want to take this mulberry silk into your project, a simple thing to do is you can load that material into the document. So it's going to simply place it up there. Or you can actually add that and then display within the editor as well. So if you want to automatically open that up. So how you would do that, so open existing library, create new. You can actually remove the library, create category if you want to. So I am going to open another library. And for the moment, bear with me while I path to it. Good. Hold on, I can't tell as well in this. There we go. So there is a semi-gloss that I downloaded. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up. Then that might take a second, but then that is ready in your project, really any Revit to go forward with. So that's then in there. And of course, you can look in there and load items in there as well. So next up is this materials, I called it materials webinar library. So I had a question from a client the other day. What happens when I have a variety of materials already in one project and I want to use them again for my next project because they came out really well? So what you can do in that instance is you can create a new library, which is what I did. I named it accordingly. It will then populate down here. And then from there, you can come in here and I am going to say, There's a good siding in here, so I'm going to go find that really quick. And as you can see, there is a lot in here. So I know this siding clapboard is good. So what I can do then is I can right click and I can actually add to. And you can see I can actually add to a variety of places at once. So I'll just do the materials webinar. So that is in there. And then when I would go to my other project, that file, that image itself is going to be ready to be used. Okay. So as reference, exploring all of these little options down here, creating and duplicating a new material. So personally, I like to start from the default, or perhaps if you know you want something similar, such as more siding, you can certainly select that as well. Another way you can do it is to right click and do a duplicate from here. So if I would duplicate siding clapboard, and I'm going to rename it, go with beige. Maybe I'll look for something along those lines. And now after I have renamed this accordingly, I want to fill out any identity data information that might apply to this. And you can see already there was a cost associated with that original clapboard, and that cost is then assigned to the one that I just created as well. Graphics, same as before, and I am seeing a question for shading settings. What does use render appearance mean? So it's a great question. So by default, you'll see that this is, a gray color in nature. Referencing this appearance, we can see, and it might take a second, my materials have been a little slow lately, that this is going to be a blue color in nature. And if I would select that use render appearance, it's going to relate back to that initial blue color more so than what that gray is. And it's just a simple way, in my opinion, to kind of keep track and have a little bit more realistic view of what you are working with. So if I would come back to graphics and I'd select that use render, you will see that that color then automatically changes to that color that was associated with that appearance. So again, relating back to that appearance, double checking where that little hand is, we do see that that does say 1. So I certainly want to ensure that I duplicate the asset, and then perhaps I want to find a new asset, which would be a great use of our asset browser. So if I would bring that up and I would search siding, and it might take a second, so bear with me. We do now see that there are some sidings that are populating within here. So very similar, smooth, and you do want to look at the aspect of appearance versus thermal. So I'm going to select the beige one here. It's kind of what I'm looking for. And you will see that there's kind of a two-way looking arrow. So that two-way looking arrow replaces the current asset in the editor. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. Right, and you'll see a lot of things kind of just change there for a second. So this kind of defaulted back to that, and it canceled out of that search, as well as this renamed itself based upon that asset that I loaded in. And additionally, my preview here switched from walls to a cube. So just be aware that quite a few pieces of information did change in that experience. Okay. So I am going to close out of this for 1 second and save this just to be on the safe side, because we do encourage saving often here at MicroCAD. All right. Then I will open that back up. And I think I have covered all of the buttons that we have seen within here. Let me see in here. Yeah, it appears so. So the great thing about materials, in addition to this, and this is really, I'm going to change this off realistic because it is taking quite a few seconds to cooperate here. is, like I said before, they're great for multiple uses. So tagging information as well as cost estimating. So I'm actually going to look at that here for the moment. So I already have a schedule kind of pre-baked in here. And one of the things you will see in this wall material takeoff is everything that is broken down to associated to that material. So, excuse me, related to the walls from that material. So you'll see air is in there. There is brick. I do see still a default wall somewhere is hiding within my project that I do need to go find. You will also see that you can have elements such as paint and actually applied as paint within your project as well. And all of this has area tied to it as well as cost. And from there, you can calculate a total material cost, which is a calculated parameter within the schedule. So just to be aware of that. And then one of my personal recommendations with this is you can actually then use our MicroCAD productivity tools to export this into an Excel, and you can work forward with that. So I am going to show that example real quick. And if you are familiar with our MicroCAD productivity tools, you will know that you cannot export a schedule while you are in that view. So that is why I closed out. But I am going to bring up what we call our BIM query. And of course, it opens on my other screen. So let me drag that across. And then from there, I can actually bring up that wall material takeoff. And then I can do a quick save. You'll see I already did one here earlier today. I'm going to save that, overwrite it, close out, and then just bring this up for everyone in Excel just to give you a little preview of what it would look like. Of course, everything always opens on the other screen. And from here, you can certainly take this information, go to your cost estimating team, and go forward with that. So I'm going to close out of that for the moment. And as reference, I know one of the things we also talked about was material tags. So I'm going to look at my Annotate tab. And then if you aren't familiar, there is a material tag. I have the keyboard shortcut MT tied to it. You can certainly come in here, hover over something, and place it as necessary. And like I stated before, we've seen a lot of clients come through and use this for wall type of sections, that type of information. Right. And one more thing that I do want to point out, this is a lot of information that is being tied together here and a lot of bandwidth being used. A lot of these materials feed straight into Enscape, which is our software, our rendering software that we do recommend, and we are a seller if you are interested. And I'm not going to open Enscape simply because there's so many things going on with my internet today. But what I do have is I do have a PowerPoint here that I am going to bring up. And let me see. All right, let's hope this plays well. Let me double check. It does appear that you all can see this. And everything that you are seeing in this video in relation to materials is completely straight out of Revit. There is no additional third-party Photoshop or any material editing that I have done in the rendering software. So hopefully this isn't too glitchy as I play. And there is no sound associated with it, so I'm just going to take a quick drink of water while this plays. All right, so hopefully that came through pretty well for everyone. I think it might be just a little glitchy with everything kind of running here today. So with that, I am going to switch back to Revit. Is there any questions that we are starting to see at this time, Rebecca, that we need to address? Or is there anything anyone wants to discuss? We can certainly unmute you on the line if there is something.
It looks like we do have a question here actually going back to the materials. It says, can you explain how an asset relates to a material?
Yes, so an asset is what is defining that material. So let me expand this, and I apologize, it's getting a little glitchy. I'm not sure why today. So an asset can be thought of as an appearance asset, a physical asset, or a thermal asset. So at the base end, the assets are feeding upstream, much like profiles within Revit. Profiles feed upstream to a lot of information. So depending upon the asset, they're going to have different entities of information. So as we see here, our horizontal beige does have an image associated with it, as well as a fade, a glossiness. And remember, this beige is out of the box Revit, so keep that in mind, as well as it has some reflectivity to it, and there is a bump image associated with it as well. So these assets are what are defining not only the render properties, but those physical and thermal ones as well. And of course, that's going to give you, how much relief you're going to see in your siding, how much undulation you're going to see in there. So if I look at my other clapboard, this came up also from the out of the box Revit. So you will see that there is a bit of slight difference. And that's not anything I am setting. That is the way Revit is operating and the way these assets are coming in. So you'll see this one has more of a type of roughness and a color associated with it, and then a relief pattern associated with that as well, which is slightly different from the beige siding, which are very similar in nature once you are in the physical built environment, but their assets look slightly differently. At the same time, if I would look at let me look at one of my Sherwin-Williams ones here, because I know they're pretty good. Bear with me. Wow, this is really starting to, I apologize, this is really starting to creep along the more I get into this. I'm just going to pick this first material here. I'm going to load that in, and we'll see that appearance is very specifically tied. In this instance, it says wall paint. So the color associated with it, what that finish is, what that application is. And again, the appearance really feeds downstream to those rendering properties. All right, hopefully please let me know if that answers your question or if you still have more questions about that. Right. Rebecca, what is next up in line? I keep seeing a couple pop in here, but I'm not sure where I'm at on the list.
Yeah, so hopefully that did explain the assets. We did get a second question about, asking to go into more detail, but hopefully that answered it. If not, please let us know. But we do have another question here, actually two-part question. Is there an instance where the same material has different appearance assets, and what's the application to have one material and many assets?
Okay. I'm not really sure I followed this question, to be honest with you.
Yeah, so if that can be explained a little more, we can get that answered, maybe rephrase it slightly different way. But I guess we'll give everyone a couple minutes if they have more questions about the assets. And I do actually have one coming in asking more about our productivity tools and the Enscape that you mentioned.
Yes.
Yeah, so the question is to kind of maybe talk about them a little more, and then also the pricing for those. So the pricing on them for the yearly options for Enscape, which was that short video that you guys just saw, for a fixed seat, it's about $469 for the year. And for a floating seat, it's $699 for the year. But of course, get in touch with your MicroCAD representative if you want more information about them, or if you're looking for different options. And for our tools, they do, I believe they are sold by themselves. And annually, that is $195. And if you are looking to get those along with our support as a package, that is $299. So again, those are all annual, but if you're interested, definitely talk to your representative. They can get a quote for you, figure out, what you already might have, or if you need possibly longer contracts for those. So yeah, can you maybe talk a little more about those two plugins that we have?
Yeah, sure. So, okay, I'm trying to bring up Enscape. All right. So I'm not going to move around a bunch simply, again, because of bandwidth and everything that is running. But this is Enscape. And as you will see, this is a direct representation of what is coming straight from Revit. So if I would go in and change the color of the door, that's going to update automatically. And one of the nice things, let me shrink this down just a little bit, bear with me please. That is nice. Any 3D views that you currently have within Revit you can automatically go there within Enscape. Excuse me, I'm getting my softwares confused for the moment. So for example, I have one that's called Kitchen. I'm going to go there real quick. I'm gonna go kitchen, maybe. All right, there we go. So it did open up. I'm trying to operate everything off one screen. Normally I got a couple going, so bear with me. So this brings up the kitchen, and I can open the kitchen as well. Let me see real quick here in Revit. So this is very real time. So if I would come in here, and I'm not trying to play any tricks with the stuff, but if I delete a couple bar stools, I go back to Enscape and it is reflective there as well. Right there, instant time, really. Like I said, normally I have two screens. I can't show you two screens at once, so that's why I'm flipping back and forth. But we have found that it is a great software. I love it personally because I don't feel like I have to come in and alter things that I have done in Revit. If you are using Revit 2020 or 2021, more than likely you have the fly mode, which helps your clients possibly understand and fly about your views a little bit more. The Enscape really just takes it to that next level. And one thing I do want to make note, that video that I did show, I think it's about 10 seconds or somewhere in there when it's not glitchy, only took 4 minutes to render. So this is not something that is going to take hours upon hours for your machines to render. So just keep that in mind as well. All right, so I'm going to minimize that for the second. And then I am going to go back to our, we had a question on the productivity tools. So those are a tab that is installed within Revit. So within there, you can see there is quite a bit of tools, and we certainly aren't going to go over all of them today, as that's not what this webinar is focused for. But some of the great things you can do, such as that BIM query, you can export, wall schedules to Excel, especially when you're working with door schedules or window schedules. You can get in there, export them to Excel, manipulate that information in Excel, and then subsequently bring that back in. I don't have anything kind of off the top to show you right now, but that is available. A couple of my other favorites, I'll go here real quick to 3D, is this resize section box. I think this is kind of, there we go. So the resize section box is great because you can look at a variety of ways to actually zoom in with a section box. So you can select a view. So any of your floor plans, your ceiling plans, area plans, you can base it upon grids. I don't have any in this project. You can also look at the rooms and spaces. And I'm not sure why I don't have a level 1 in this instance. I'm gonna have to look into that. As well as you can do manual too. So for just an example, if I do all of level 2, I apply a section box, it zooms into that level 2 really quickly, close, and you can see I can zoom in, and there's some ceilings kind of floating in there because they're associated with level 2. But you can start to get some quick views. It's really a nice way to set up views as well. So tied to your level 1, tied to your level 2, something that might be tied to a restroom or an atrium if you're in the commercial industry. So I was teaching a bunch of residential folks this morning, so my brain's still kind of on that track. So yeah, I do believe we have a webinar coming up related specifically to the tools that we can get you information on if that's something you want more and to learn more about. All right. I think, did I see another question pop up within the questions box, Rebecca?
Yes, we do have one more, probably the last one, but if you guys have any others, please throw them in. So the question is if you can explain a little bit about how you would sort and filter materials in a schedule, and can you add additional parameters to materials?
Okay, yeah, sure. Let me go. All right, so in this instance, what I did was a wall material takeoff. So schedules and quantities, material related to walls. If you are familiar with schedules, of course, then you're going to go into your fields. And in this instance, because I was looking at something specifically for cost information, I didn't add a ton in, but I did add a name, area, cost as paint. And then total material cost is actually a calculated parameter. So if I take a quick look at that, you'll see that that is actually the material area times the cost. And then you do have to divide it by 1 simply because of the units within Revit. If we all remember our high school, I think it's algebra, we need to make sure all the units cancel out. So from there, I did not filter by anything. You certainly can. And then sorting and grouping, I started based upon the name, and then certainly didn't itemize everything and looked at some totals under the formatting. Right. I think I see something popping up here.
Yeah, so that is actually clarifying the question from before.
Okay.
So it sounds like it's just she's asking, what's the advantage of having assets that duplicate if it's specific to a certain material?
So there are certain instances, where I've seen, really type of finish material. Granted, we don't see a lot of people using duplicate independent materials within Revit that much. Why it is set up that way, I'm not really sure. That's something that, has kind of always been that way from the get-go with Revit. All right, and I believe, okay, there was one more about adding additional parameters to materials. In what aspect are you wanting to add additional parameters? In regards to rendering and tagging, and I'm not really sure. That's kind of a broad question, if you wouldn't mind clarifying that one.
Okay, so while there's the clarification, tagging and scheduling. So we could add sheen to paints.
To be honest, I'm not sure off the top of my head. I wouldn't say that it's impossible, though, to be completely honest. That would be something that I would have to kind of double check and see if it was applicable, because I'm thinking a shared parameter within a tag related to the material also. I would have to research that one a little bit more, but now I know what I'm going to do this afternoon. I'm going to double check that question. We can actually get back to you on that, Rebecca, if you wouldn't mind making a note of that one.
Yes, will do for sure. And I guess if anyone has last minute questions to throw in there, we can maybe show a few of the upcoming webinars that we do have. Actually, I think we have officially 2. We do have some upcoming, like Mariah said, for the productivity tools. That is going to be mid-March. We're just working out the details of that, but that should be coming up. So this Friday at 11 a.m., we do have one for Bluebeam Review Extreme, talking about scaling a PDF. So definitely register for that one. And then on March 9th, it's Productivity in Civil 3D. So if there's ever a webinar that you're not able to attend live, we do have the recordings up on our YouTube channel. If you don't see them there, you can definitely reach out and we'll get that over to you. So I think we have answered everything, but we'll definitely reach back out about the tagging and scheduling question. And also the handouts that I had mentioned earlier on, they are there in the panel. There is actually one for the productivity tools for Revit, and there's a few talking about Enscape, just reasons to use Enscape, and 7 essential steps to creating realistic renderings. So definitely take a look at those if you're interested in those tools or in Enscape. Reach out and we can put you in touch with your MicroCAD rep. They can get you a quote and kind of let you know how that all works. So if there's no other questions, I think we're reaching the end of the hour, so I don't want to keep everybody for too long. I don't know if there was anything else, Mariah, that you wanted to add before we wrap up.
I don't think so. The only thing that I did think of, and this is kind of a little bit different, if any of you are, you're starting to use materials and you might be at the stage where your client is unsure of what kind of colors they are wanting, a great way to use that is actually some global parameters. So you'll see I have some built in kind of here. So, my door material, what is that, trim, and actual hardware material. And then a lot of your families can actually tie back to these. So real quick, if I would look at my door here, edit type, and all of these little gray boxes on the side, you can associate to a global parameter. So again, this is a great way if your client is unsure if they want white, if they want black, if they want wood tone, you can associate back to that global parameter, and then you can easily change that global parameter and it's going to update everywhere that it is associated. So it saves you a lot less clicks and kind of CYA a little bit throughout your project. So it's the only random little last tip that I thought about, so I wanted to share it.
Perfect. And we also noticed that you had saved favorites. Is there a way to do those in a central location to share?
So what I would recommend doing is actually having more of a folder kind of that's labeled, company favorites. And then there should be a way where you can actually, I apologize, it's giving me a second here, where you can actually save that folder. And I would just recommend them putting that on a server in a central location for everyone. Yeah, I apologize. It's taking a second here. It's getting a little tired itself in the afternoon. My Revit needs some coffee, as you can clearly see.
Oh boy. Okay. So we'll give that a second. But there, we can definitely reach back out to see, if you guys have more questions or if you're interested in any, further training on this. So if that is not loading, we can wrap up and try and send over some screenshots for you. It looks like it does need some more coffees. So
it does, yeah. I'm betting it's because I have so many things running. I've got Enscape and the go-to webinar and all that. It's a little bit much for it, I think, right now.
Yeah, definitely. But so we'll go ahead and wrap up, but we can get some screenshots over and answer everyone else's questions that we're going to look into. So for now, we'll say thank you. And if you do have any requests for anything, definitely reach out. I think Mariah had her email at the beginning, and you can also just respond to your registration email. It'll come back to me, and we can help you out. So we will let you guys go for the afternoon. And thank you so much for joining.
All right, thank you, everyone.